If you visit Thirsk Museum in northeast England, you will come across a chair fixed to a wall 5 feet off the ground. You will also find a written note attached to the chair, warning people not to attempt to sit on it. It's to protect any wayward thrill seekers from killing themselves, or more specifically, from winding up dead shortly afterwards. This is the Dead Man's Chair of Thirsk. For the last 3 centuries, this chair has been reportedly killing anyone who sat on it. Before ending up in the museum out of harm's way, this chair sat in the Busby Stoop Inn, a popular public house and tavern located near Sandhutton in North Yorkshire. The Chair of Death, or the Dead Man's Chair of Thirsk as it's also known, is one of the most intriguing and enduring mysteries of a cursed object, spanning an incredible 300 years. And it began with a curse laid on it by its owner way back in 1702, en route to his own execution. The chair remained in the pub on that very spot for centuries as a local curiosity, with most people refusing to go anywhere near it. But not everyone, of course. As we all know, there's always one. And the last 300 years produced plenty of ones. Patrons, as they became drunker and braver, would dare each other to sit on it. Those who accepted the dare had a curious habit of coming to an abrupt end shortly afterwards. In fact, so concerned was the man who inherited the pub along with the chair and witnessed these events himself, that finally, in 1978, he gave this popular but morbid local attraction away to the Thirsk Museum for safekeeping. So what is the story behind the Dead Man's Chair of Thirsk and the curse that followed it? In the early 1700s, in the village of Kirby Wisk in Yorkshire, Northern England, there was an inn that stood by a crossroads which now marks the junction of the A61 and the A167. The inn was owned by a notorious local man named Thomas Busby. Busby ran all sorts of low-level criminal enterprises. He was also well known as a belligerent and violent drunk who would spend most of his time sitting in his favourite oak chair at the inn, drinking himself into oblivion, or starting fights if he was still sober enough to. Whichever came first. Busby loved his chair so much that he even used to sleep in it after getting blind drunk, and would get angry if he saw anyone else sat on it. Apparently, it was a very comfortable chair. In 1700, a new opportunity for Busby's enterprises arose when a wealthy black market entrepreneur named Daniel Aughty arrived in town, and the two men soon became acquainted. Aughty was a counterfeiter who specialised in coin clipping, a practice that involved shaving or clipping small amounts off existing coins, then melting those shavings down into a bar and selling it off to a goldsmith or making counterfeit coins out of them. As genuine coins back in those days were prone to wear and lose their shape from everyday use, coin clipping was a practice that generally went unnoticed. It was a lucrative crime too. Aughty was looking to expand his business in the area. He quickly bought a secluded farmhouse on a hilltop, which he later called Danity Hall, and he and his daughter Elizabeth moved in. Danity Hall was just 3 miles away from Busby's Inn, so the proximity was perfect for the two schemers, and the recent arrival soon set to work converting the property into the perfect counterfeiting business. Shortly after getting involved with Audie's business, Busby also got involved with Audie's daughter, and they soon became a couple. Not long afterwards, they decided they wanted to get married. Appalled at the thought of his own daughter associating with a criminal other than himself, Audie refused to give his blessing. But this made little difference to the enamoured couple, and they went ahead and tied the knot regardless. Despite his fury at the marriage, Audie had little choice but to tolerate it under the circumstances. Making an enemy of his partner in crime would be foolhardy, but this did become a source of increasing tension between the two criminals. Despite those tensions, the two busied themselves on a very successful coin forging operation, and Audie extended his firm to accommodate and better hide his business, adding concealed rooms, basement passages, and heavy oak and iron doors to reinforce every entrance. His hilltop farmhouse was also a perfect vantage point from which he could monitor through numerous spy holes any unwelcome or unexpected visitors. Despite the success of their scam, they were arguing bitterly and frequently by 1702, and it wasn't long before Busby's drunken thuggery also began to have an effect on his marriage, a factor which infuriated his reluctant father-in-law. And the two men began to argue angrily over this and a mounting pyre of other resentments. Something was beginning to boil over. Late one summer night, Busby staggered home after a hard night's drinking, and on entering the door found Audie there, sitting in his favourite old oak chair, waiting for him. In the argument that followed, Audie informed him that he was going to take his daughter back home, away from him and his drunken shenanigans. Busby's ears must have been thumping as he watched his father-in-law spitting flames at him in his own home from his own chair. Threatening to take his wife away from him was bad enough, but sitting in his favourite chair whilst issuing that threat sent the angry drunk over the edge. Busby exploded, and wrenching his father-in-law from the chair, threw him out of the inn and slammed the door. Audie left without a word but plenty of resolution as he made his trek back to Donity Hall. A few nights later, he returned to the inn while his troublesome business companion was away, and he attempted to take Elizabeth home with him. As he was trying to persuade her to leave with him, Busby returned, again very drunk and again very angry, and another heated argument ensued. Audie, seeing no point in arguing further with the drunken Busby, and realising Elizabeth didn't want to leave with him, turned and left as his plastered son-in-law collapsed, growling and swearing into his chair. Again, he angrily but silently set on his way home, while Busby sat festering with rage in his faithful old oak chair, getting more and more furious with every passing minute. Finally, his temper snapped and he jumped from his chair. Staggering out into the night in an alcoholic rage, he followed Audie on the 3-mile trek home, where it is said he accosted, attacked, and beat his father-in-law to death with the very hammer that they had used to beat coins into shape with. As the waves of anger subsided and he was satisfied the old man was dead, he then set to work trying to dispose of the body and carried it out into the woods. But being as drunk as he was, it was a half-hearted effort to conceal it. Within days, an alarm was raised that Audie was missing, and a search was organised. It didn't take long to find the body or to conclude who had done it, and it didn't take long to find Busby either. He was arrested early next morning, still in his chair, sleeping off the previous night's drinking, and he was charged on the spot with the murder. His trial was swift, there was little doubt about his guilt, and he was hit with an additional charge of counterfeiting. Found guilty on both counts, he was sentenced to be hanged. Worse still, the gallows and the gibbet was to be built at the crossroads near his inn. On the morning of his execution, as he was being drawn by horse and cart to his fate, he was granted, as many condemned men were, a final drink at a tavern en route. And this he chose to have at his beloved inn, on his favourite old oak chair. It was the only small mercy of his execution spot having been built so close to his inn. When the condemned man finished his drink, he slowly stood up and got ready to leave. But then he turned to his old chair and issued a firm curse with the words, "May sudden death come to anyone who dares sit on my chair." From there, he was solemnly carted the rest of the way to his place of execution, where the sentence was hastily carried out. After his execution, Busby's corpse was covered in tar to prolong decomposition, and it was then displayed in a stoop and hung from the same scaffold at the crossroads that he had been executed on. A stoop was a type of human-shaped cage which the body of a hanged man would be displayed in as a warning and a deterrent to all who passed by. The cage would be hung by a chain and left there until the bones literally fell to the ground. The criminal, the crime, the murder and the execution were long remembered in those parts. It was shortly after his execution that the inn became known as the Busby Stoop Inn, which could have only served to aggravate his already restless spirit. Naming his inn after the very gibbet that he was publicly hanged and displayed from would not have amused the spirit of the man who was already quite humourless in life. Hanging from the spot that could easily be seen from the windows of the inn could only have added spectral salt to his nebulous wounds. Worse still, seeing a business opportunity in the legend of the curse, the new owners displayed the chair as a paid attraction for patrons to try out the curse for themselves, if they dared. It soon became a macabre tourist spot, with people from other villages and even counties visiting just to see the chair for themselves, and to drink a few quarts of ale while they were there. Needless to say, this didn't sit well with Busby's angry spirit, and not long afterwards things started to happen at the inn itself. People began to report seeing Busby's ghost sitting in his chair or wandering around the inn. Others reported seeing him appear around the area of his execution, and some even claimed to have seen him standing under the stoop where his blackened corpse hung swaying and creaking in the wind. Although it's not documented how many people did rest in the chair and come to grief afterwards, it did gain a reputation as having caused death for those who did sit in it. The first actual recorded death linked to the chair happened in 1894. A chimney sweep had stopped by at the inn for an ale and sat in the Busby chair as he chatted to a colleague. The very next day he was found hanging from the gibbet. Authorities ruled his death as a suicide, but locals believed it was the curse. Many years later, however, his colleague who had been drinking with him that night admitted to having robbed and murdered him and staged the death to look like the work of Busby's curse. During World War II, the Skipton-on-Swale airfield just 4 miles away was used by the Royal Canadian Air Force. The Busby Stoop was a favourite drinking spot for the airmen. And of course, the Busby chair became a popular object of ghoulish sport for them, as they would make bets and dare each other to try it out. But it was said that those who did take the challenge never returned from their following missions. In 1968, Tony Earnshaw took ownership of the inn and initially believed the chair to be nothing more than a harmless, quaint local attraction. But soon after taking over, even he became disturbed by the deaths that genuinely seemed to be associated with the antique. Earnshaw was working behind the bar one day when he overheard 2 RAF pilots daring each other to take the challenge. As it turned out, both of them did, and both of them were killed on their way back to the base when their vehicle hit a tree. A few years later, 2 bricklayers challenged each other with the same dare, but this time only one of them went through with it, and later that day fell to his death on the building site. Shortly afterwards, a young roofer was dared and coerced by his colleagues to try it out. He accepted, and later died in a fall when the roof he was working on collapsed. Earnshaw himself was said to have been particularly upset by this incident. And the deaths continued. A cleaning lady who accidentally stumbled into the chair while she was mopping the floor died shortly afterwards of an illness. The poor woman was familiar with the legend and had always taken care to avoid touching the chair until she had stumbled into it by accident. It's also been claimed that sometime prior to death, the time varies in all cases, victims would experience haunting phenomena, hearing strange sounds, feeling confusion and paranoia, seeing items being moved and written warnings on mirrors and walls about the person's imminent death, in addition to many other strange happenings. There is one local story of a murder attached to the chair, in which an airman who was being driven by a villager wanted to stop by the Busby Stoop so he could use the bathroom. While waiting for him, the driver decided to sit on the notorious chair to read a newspaper. He must have been a skeptic, because if he was a local man he would have been familiar with the legend. At any rate, he waited, and after a while became impatient and left. When the airman finally did emerge, he was furious to see he'd been left behind, and he later accosted and attacked the driver with a brick, killing him. There are other local stories from the decade that followed. One of a new employee at the inn who was dared one morning to sit in the chair by co-workers. He did so, and was found dead later that day. Tourists who had visited the inn and sat in the infamous chair, unfazed by the legend of the curse, were later killed in road accidents. One hitchhiker was hit by a car and also killed after briefly staying at the inn. As interesting a talking point as the local curiosity was, Mr. Earnshaw was becoming increasingly alarmed by the deaths and decided to move the antique down into the basement out of harm's way. Unfortunately, even there it claimed a further victim. A delivery man from one of the breweries was working in the cellar one day when he took a short break from the heavy lifting and sat down for a few minutes. As he was leaving, he remarked on how comfortable the chair down there was, and that it was too good to be left in the basement. Earnshaw's heart must have sank on hearing the man's parting words. And sure enough, within an hour, as he was returning to the brewery, his vehicle crashed and he was killed. That, for Earnshaw, was the final straw. He decided enough was enough and contacted the Thirsk Museum to ask if they would be interested in taking it for its historical value at least. The only condition was that they had to situate it in such a way that no one would be able to sit on it. Thirsk was happy to accept and quickly hoisted and secured the chair 5 feet off the ground. And that was that. The chair never claimed another life. But apparently, the haunting experiences didn't end there, and they weren't just attached to people who had sat on the chair. Staff and owners over the years have claimed to witness apparitions and strange happenings at the Busby Stoop Inn. One previous landlady claimed that she saw a ghostly figure moving along the upstairs landing before disappearing through a wall. I came across a comment on social media from around 2021, written by someone who had visited the Busby Stoop for a beer about 20 years earlier, and who had sat at the spot where the chair used to be, though by that stage the chair itself had been moved to the museum. He asked the pub owner about the legend, and the owner, it may have even been Mr. Earnshaw, explained that since he took over the pub, he had nothing but bad luck. He described how every morning beer taps would be running, glasses would be smashed, and things had been moved about during the night. Eventually, his family moved out of the inn, leaving him alone there. He said the weird happenings only stopped when he started stoking up the fire and leaving a pint out for Busby in his favourite old spot before going to bed. As a side note, the curator of Thirsk Museum has said that some visitors complain of a very strange feeling when they enter the room where the chair is displayed. At least one paranormal group has taken EVP recordings from around the antique, indicating that it's still haunted by Thomas Busby. The inn itself no longer carries its macabre name and is now a popular Indian restaurant and curry house. There don't seem to be any more spooky goings-on at the former inn, or more specifically, there are no more reports of any. Perhaps the new owners had managed to curry favour with Busby's ghost. There is another angle to the story which throws a little bit of earthly cold water on the legend. The chair itself was examined by furniture historian Dr. Adam Bowett, and his conclusion was that the spindles were not man-made but machine-made, putting the manufacture of the antique at around the year 1840, nearly 140 years after Busby's execution. So if that isn't the chair, where is the original? No one knows. And if that's not the original, then how did this replacement continue to dispatch anyone who sat on it? Could it be that people put all their superstitious focus onto this object, giving it almost the same energy as the original chair? If you believe these things, of course. Even in terms of the legend itself, it could simply be that so many people have passed through the inn and sat on that spot in the last 300 years, that when a percentage of them did pass on shortly afterwards, it was regarded as a sign of the curse. Who knows? Original or not, very few people seem to want to test it out now. But not no one. Believe it or not, some have attempted to bribe the curator to let them sit on the chair. All have been turned down. and one collector from the US offered $1 million to the museum for the item, but Thirsk, to their great credit, have remained steadfast to their promise to Mr. Earnshaw. Suspended many feet off the ground now, as Busby himself was in his final moments, it's very unlikely that anyone, even the most morbid and determined thrill seekers, will ever sit on it again. Good night, wherever you are.